By the end of this video, I'm going to show you some striking details from the Encyclical Magnifica Humanitas in a way you probably haven't seen before. I'm going to show you what the wizard Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings has to do with Pope Leo XIV. What can you do to better face the spiritual crisis that comes with artificial intelligence? And what are the profound guidelines that the Pope proposes not only to Catholics, but to all those who want a humanity with dignity, not one enslaved by technology? You've seen it around, right? The first encyclical of Pope Leo XIV was in the headlines of the main newspapers. Folha de São Paulo. Pope publishes Magnifica Humanitas and calls for a new global moral pact in the face of artificial intelligence and inequality. Metropolis. Pope surprises by advocating spiritual silence against technological excess. O Globo newspaper. In the Encyclical Magnifica Humanitas, the pontiff states that humanity is experiencing an unprecedented spiritual crisis. The New York Times in the United States. In Magnifica Humanitas, the Pope warns humanity against the worship of technology and power. Le Monde in France, Magnifica Humanitas. The Pope calls for a revolution of human dignity. But is that all? Well, even for those who only read the headlines, there's already an important message there. The Pope calls for the restoration of human dignity, a proposal for recovery, spiritual restoration that can come from withdrawal or spiritual silence regarding an excess of technology. You can see that the Pope is concerned about social inequality, which increases with too much power in the hands of a few, especially a few American billionaires who are susceptible to short-lived leaders, in the White House, for example. Do I need to say who they are? Just look at who has been the Pope's biggest enemy. And Leo shows himself. He is deeply concerned, as many of us are, with the surrender of the human soul that resides in our brain and also in our heart and also in each one of our cells. The surrender of this, which for millennia has been understood as a divine gift, to a technology that seizes what we have that is most precious, that thinks for us and intends to manipulate us relentlessly, incessantly, and irremediably. What should we do? Well, that's what the Encyclical Magnifica Humanitas talks about. It's not only of interest to the 1.4 billion Catholics in the world, but to all of humanity. But after all, what's inside this document that's equivalent to a 180-page book? I'm going to highlight some important moments from the encyclical here so you can dive deeper and reflect with me. Look, right in the introduction, the Pope justifies his approach with two biblical passages, and both are from the Old Testament. The first is the construction of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, which leads us to the Jewish understanding of the origins of humanity, and comes right after the genealogies of Noah's sons. Human beings, having settled on the plain of Shinar, decide to build a city and a tower whose top reaches the heavens. In this way, they intend to obtain stability and power, and above all, to become famous, fearing being scattered across the earth. The undertaking appears imposing. This is what Pope Leo writes: a single language, a single technology, a single direction. However, still in the words of the Pope, the project hides the fact that it is a work conceived without reference to God, supported by a uniformity that eliminates diversity and that, instead of communion, chooses homogenization. Does that make sense when you think about artificial intelligence? That's right, it doesn't think. It proposes a collection of pre-existing ideas, organizes, homogenizes, and delivers you a finished product without a soul. Going back to the encyclical, the Pope reminds us that in the account of Genesis, when the city is built upon pride and the pretense of being self-sufficient, communication is interrupted, languages become confused, and human beings stop understanding each other. And what the Pope proposes is the view that the Tower of Babel reveals the limit of any construction. Even though it is grandiose, it is only sustained by the absolutization of the human and its claim of self-sufficiency, by the sacrifice of people's dignity in the name of efficiency, and in the Catholic understanding, the ambition to reach heaven without God's blessing. The second reference the Pope makes in the encyclical is to the book of Nehemiah, one of the historical books of the Old Testament. It starts during a vulnerable period in ancient Israel's history. After the Babylonian exile, we know that the Jews left, were driven out by war, and part of the people returned to Jerusalem. But the city remained devastated, with the walls still in ruins and the gates consumed by fire. According to the biblical account, as a result of the destruction caused precisely by the Babylonians, which led to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. In the year 586, Nehemiah, a Jew serving the Persian king Artaxerxes, receives the news of the disastrous state of the city of his ancestors. He fasts, prays, and then, upon returning to Jerusalem, silently examines the destroyed places, gathers the families, and entrusts each of them with a part of the wall to rebuild. And he listens to their fears, coordinates their efforts, and also faces opposition. That is what it means to be human. The account shows how the city is reborn, not thanks to the initiative of a single person, but through the shared responsibility of all the people, priests, craftsmen, heads of families, women, and young people. Now, why is Nehemiah's wall an example for us today? In the view of Pope Leo XIV, it is a work that has God at its center and that rebuilds relationships even before the stones. And the Pope concludes this part of the Encyclical by proposing, "Let us avoid the Babel syndrome, the idolatry of profit that sacrifices the weakest, the uniformity that erases differences, the pretense of a single language, even a digital one, bent on reducing everything to data and performance metrics, including the mysteries of the person. This is the risk of dehumanization," says the Pope. Building a future that excludes God and reduces the other to a means, a temptation as old as it is new. On the other hand, the Pope concluded, we choose the path of Nehemiah, who highlights the value of working together to ensure the safety of God's city for the exiles who were returning. To rebuild today means recognizing amid a plurality of voices and visions that at times recalls the confusion of tongues, the existence of a bright possibility, says the Pope. That of building together, transforming diversity into a resource and making listening and dialogue the common ground on which justice and fraternity grow. Later, there's another remarkable moment in the Encyclical. Of course, I'm here selecting parts according to my own criteria from my own reading, but that doesn't mean the other parts aren't important. Quite the opposite. I'm now referring to the chapter in which Pope Leo XIV specifically addresses this kingdom, a technological resource that we call artificial intelligence. Even though there isn't really intelligence, but rather an incredible capacity for machine learning combined with immense computing power. I don't intend to present a treatise on artificial intelligence here, writes the Pope. I will limit myself to recalling some essential elements for a moral and social discernment that safeguards the primacy of the person, so that it is always human intelligence with its conscience and freedom that guides technical innovations and responsibly establishes their use and limits. Shall we reread this comment to understand it a bit more? Remember essential elements, says the Pope, moral and social discernment that safeguards the primacy of the person, that keeps the human person as the top priority, so that it is always human intelligence, with our conscience and our capacity to be free, to guide the technical innovations that are emerging more and more rapidly, responsibly establishing their use and limits. The Pope quickly recognizes that any statement about artificial intelligence runs the risk of becoming obsolete in a short time, given the impressive speed at which these systems are developing, as we know very well. But right after, the Pope makes another statement that is equally, in my view, unquestionable. We know very little about how it actually works. In fact, modern artificial intelligence systems are grown rather than built, says the Pope. Programmers do not directly design every detail, but create an architecture on which artificial intelligence grows. And the Pope concludes, therefore it becomes clear that a twofold commitment is urgent. On the one hand, yes, deeper scientific research. On the other hand, the exercise of moral and spiritual discernment. Quote, these systems imitate some functions of human intelligence, By doing so, they often surpass us in the speed and breadth of their calculations, offering concrete benefits in numerous fields. However, this power remains exclusively linked to data processing, so don't confuse the two. These so-called artificial intelligence systems do not have lived experience, they do not have bodies like we do, they do not feel joy or pain, they do not mature through relationships, and they do not inwardly know what love, work, friendship, and responsibility mean. Shall we reflect on this? Come back with me so we can understand this. That power remains exclusively linked to data processing. Everything that artificial intelligence produces comes from already known data. It is not someone with lived experience who can say, "I think, therefore I am." No way. It doesn't have a body. And if it doesn't have a body, how can it have a soul? They don't experience the feelings we do at birth, throughout life, in childhood, feelings like joy. They don't know what the pain we feel is, which can be physical pain or, for example, the pain of missing someone. They don't mature in relationships. In fact, they don't care about relationships. They don't know the meaning of love, and they never will. It's striking. It makes perfect sense to me. It makes perfect sense to you too. And the Pope goes on to remind us that these systems don't even have a moral conscience. In fact, not at all. They don't judge good and evil. They don't grasp the ultimate meaning of situations. They don't take on the weight of the consequences. They can imitate languages, behaviors, evaluations. They can simulate empathy or understanding. But they don't understand what they produce because they don't enter the emotional, relational, and spiritual horizon in which human beings grow wise. Even though these tools are presented as capable of learning, says the Pope, it is not the experience of someone who lets themselves be shaped by life and grows over time through choices, mistakes, forgiveness, and faithfulness. It is rather a statistical adaptation based on data and results. And then I ask you, do you want to let your life be guided by a statistic? Do you allow yourself to be part of a statistic or to be manipulated by that statistic? Think about it. Think for yourself, guided by your own conscience. Don't ask artificial intelligence because it won't be able to answer. The Pope recognizes the value of technology in several ways, but warns about negative impacts, such as on the environment, as we already know. The Pope says, current AI systems require large amounts of energy and water, have a significant impact on carbon dioxide emissions, and are highly resource-intensive. That's why it's essential to develop more sustainable technological solutions to reduce environmental impact and take care of what the Pope calls our common home. The common home is our planet, which, for those in power, and many are intoxicated like golems enchanted by the ring of power, well, for them, it seems like a disposable home, which could easily be replaced by colonization on the moon or, who knows, very soon, even on Mars. And in this context, understanding that we are living through one of the worst crises of power worship, just as in the not-so-distant past people worship the devil, the Pope quotes a saying from the wizard Gandalf, the wise old man from Lord of the Rings. It is not our task to master all the tides of the world, but rather to do what we can to help in the times we are living through, eradicating evil in the fields we know, so that those who live after us may have clean land to cultivate. The beautiful phrase by Gandalf appears in the third book of the Lord of the Rings saga, and the Pope makes a point of mentioning the famous author J.R.R. Tolkien, a Catholic writer of the 20th century. Leo XIII repeatedly expresses his concern with a term that also touches me deeply, because it is something I have been feeling daily in our human relationships: dehumanization. And wishing to avoid our dehumanization, the Pope proposes 5 paths that he himself points out are not the only ones, but they are powerful. Disarm words, build peace through justice, take on the perspective of the victims, cultivate healthy realism, revitalize dialogue and multilateralism. And those who are possessed by the ring of power, those who today see themselves as the very lords of the rings, simply are not able to follow these paths. They are like alcoholics who, if necessary, are even capable of drinking pure alcohol, like addicts who inject anything into their veins as long as it leads them into a false state of excitement and euphoria. Very different from that. This is what I see every day in my work as a critical journalist. What lies before us? Essentially, they are leaders of nations and owners of technology companies. Deeply narcissistic, living in their own unrealities, ignoring the victims of the success of their enterprises. Egocentric, incapable of standing up for justice or peace among humans, remaining silent about wars, or even starting them themselves. And certainly destroying the holy idea of multilateralism, which was formed precisely after the world was shattered into pieces in the Second World War. When humanity, in tatters, devastated by Hitler's demonic ambitions, realized that it was necessary to make decisions together, because the future we have on this planet is also shared by all of us. Even though those who are bewitched by the ring of power are unable to see all of this. Finally, I highlight among the conclusions of the Encyclical Magnificat Humanitas. In the final part, the Pope's call more specifically to Catholics and Christians about the true meaning of communion, which should not be just an individualistic act of redeeming oneself from one's own sins, but above all to share our lives with those who live close to us, and I would add, also with those who live far away. The Eucharist opens us to justice and sharing, says the Pope, with special attention to those who bear the burden of poverty and marginalization. While the new economic and technological networks can generate exclusion, isolation, and dependencies, the Church, nourished by the Eucharist, is called to show a different standard, preserving bonds, giving a voice back to those who are not seen, and guiding processes toward the dignity of people. These are excerpts from the Encyclical. If you like this video, like, share, and follow our channel Jornada Infinita with Rodrigo Alvarez here on YouTube and also on Instagram. And if you want to dive deeper into the story of Jesus and the message that the Pope is now reinforcing, come check out the course Jesus à Luz da História. The link is pinned here in the first comment.